Welcome, everyone, to the Wonders of Fantasy Creation. This is a podcast that is designed for those who are interested in world building. If you're either a story writer, a dungeon master, this is a podcast for you guys to have a bit of inspiration and learning from others on how they create their characters, the worlds, storytelling, and plots. This is our first episode, and here in this episode, I had two amazing dungeon masters that I had the pleasure to play with both and both their tables, and they're going to tell you a little bit on how to get into world building, and you will see me kind of picking their brains on how they get started and what they do to help create their world. Hope you guys have a pleasure time watching the first episode, and thank you for your support. But yeah, so hello everyone. Thank you for coming in to view us. My name is Devon, and welcome to the World of the Ether. Here is a podcast. What we do is we get story builders, dungeon masters, and other people who are really are into creating a world or even making enticing NPCs or impactful encounters. Here I have two of dungeon masters are here who have created some worlds, and I actually had a chance to play into some of them. So I introduce you Jarrett, the one that's kind of in the middle of the nice little forest background right there, and David. His camera is not the greatest, so he's like whatever.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. But yeah, so I guess before we really get right into the deep of the world building, I guess you can tell a little bit about yourselves. So I guess start with you, Jarrett. What's kind of made you into like Dungeons and Dragons? Because that's where you kind of play and make your worlds and everything.
Yeah, a couple of my friends, David included, were talking about getting into it a couple years ago now, probably like 5 or 6. And yeah, no, it just kind of sprung from there. I was originally a player, just playing the game, and after some time, I wanted to take a jump at the DM seat, and ever since then, it's been fun. So it's good fun.
All right. And so when you're creating like your worlds, right? What type of inspiration do you get on like making those worlds? Are they from like films that you watch, video games, books?
Yeah, from films, video games, books, pretty much anything that interests me. History too, if there's some cool things that happen in history that you're like, oh, I could spin that into a nice story, or build something from that. But yeah, no, just general pieces of media that I enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I will incorporate little bits and pieces of it into building a world.
Okay. And so currently right now I'm actually playing your campaign. What like inspiration did you get from that? As for like
This one particularly,
hmm.
I did some research on Book of Revelations, and like the biblical apocalypse was a big start for it because I always kind of thought that was cool. But I took inspiration from other things, like a couple games I've played, like namely one that I was playing was Fire Emblem Three Houses at the time. So that one has some inspiration, and a book series by Brent Weeks called what was it? The Lightbringer series. And so I kind of all three of those things together kind of sparked this idea.
All right. And how about you, David?
Mhm.
What made you get into like this kind of world building type of setting, into the love of the game of Dungeons and Dragons?
I blame my dad. Playing that as a kid, he'd kind of make me just come to the table and be like, "This is you," and just point at a piece of paper and was like, "And this is how it works." And then I stopped playing it, and then I started playing the newer versions with friends.
All right. And for your like actually you're right now you're in a process of still making like your new campaign, still kind of the same world if I'm correct. What gave you the inspiration for like that world and everything?
Uh, I guess just the current one I'm working on is definitely just, I guess, the steampunk genre in general,
Okay.
with the most bland fantasy tropes mixed in on top of books Anything from Brandon Sanderson pretty much is
Okay.
a good inspiration.
All right. So I guess with that, I think that's a pretty good introduction. So I guess we'll get right into the world building. As for me, sometimes I always think of myself, oh, this would be a great idea, or this is a pretty good concept of like a world that I can create. But the problem is there's so much to it that sometimes you just get lost. So for you, like you two, where do you start first when it comes to like creating the world? And I guess I'll start with David on that one.
Uh, where do I start? I guess my main thing that I always start with is just thinking of, I suppose, like a map,
A
how
map?
big I
All right.
want the world to be, whether it's just something small, like a town, or like a small region of a larger country. And then from there, I kind of just pick a place and use that as a focal point. But I always enjoy the grand, large things of building a big, full world rather than just one small little place.
Okay. And Jared, is that the same for you, or do you tackle it a little bit different?
I more or less, when building a world, I think about the story that I want to tell,
Hmm.
and I make sure that the world reflects that story. So if I want to tell a story about like political intrigue, I will make sure the world that I'm building is very influenced by its political structure. If I want to tell a story of adventure, I'll build it a little less, fleshed out, more wild, so that there's things to find and adventures to go on. So I focus on what kind of story I want to tell and then go from there on building the world.
Okay. So, I guess my next question is, say if I was a character or an NPC and say I was into your world, what are like kind of like the assumptions I can make of your world? Like, are there going to be many gods, or are there going to be like one god? Is the world going to be kind of tamed or untamed type of deal? I guess I should say that I should ask that one at a time. But uh no, actually I'll kind of ask it like that way. But yeah, so what would I would do if I was in a world? What can I assume that's in your world? Like it's a definite, you don't have to ask. It's just a core assumption I can make. And I'll ask you, Jared, first on that one.
Well, for the current world I'm building, a core assumption that you would make that like your character should just know right off the bat is it's very heavily influenced by its theological ideologies. So since I mentioned that I based it off of like the Book of Revelations and biblical apocalypse,
Hmm.
I do have a lot of, I guess I would say, things related to that going on. So going into it, your characters are going to know that the church that I have going and built up there is a very big part of the world. You're going to know about that. And because I focused on that and the political structure of it, you're definitely going to have preconceived notions of the different political groups. Your character is going to know the differences between those groups and probably fall into that ideology, one of them, one way or another.
Okay.
So that's something that your character would come in with that preconceived notion, that assumption.
Okay. And as for you, David, in your world, is it you say it's kind of like a steampunk in a way? Is it going to be assumed that there's going to be such things like guns or vehicle like land vehicles like cars of sorts will be like in your world that could be assumed, or is it going to be kind of like a little bit different in a way?
Mm. Well, I mean, if you just look at like Victorian England and actual history, just I guess a lot more fantasy magic stuff that is not anywhere possible in the real world. So I suppose just think of, you know, a lot of technological advancements. So yeah, cars, guns, and then in some cases, all the grand other things about Victorian sadness, depression, the fun things of living in a smog-filled cesspit, uh, and all of that fun jazz. But yeah, that's pretty much what I would assume you would think of what is stereotypical Victorian times, but magic mixed in.
All right. And kind of going to that a little bit topic of like, the world being kind of like enclosed, sometimes depression, no, having that kind of realistic into life. Is it okay to have that like in your worlds, having those dark things that can be in our world, such as, human trafficking, um, depression, cultists and all that? Is that, would you say that's still a good thing to have? Or is that something that you should have it kind of like in the background, not really shine a light to it?
Hmm. I suppose it depends on if you're building a world, what people look into. Depends who you're building the world for. So obviously, if you're not building it for people who would want to go for those things, then just a background thing, or try and work around those types of themes. But if they're people who are actively looking out for those types of darker stories, then yeah, I would say add them in as not so much a background, but more of a foreground, frontal thing,
Okay.
main thing.
All right. So now we kind of have your world. You're making your map. Now, here's my question on the map part, right? So I'm assuming both of you guys, when you make a map, you make the whole world map, correct?
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
always, depending
Not
on
always? Okay.
certain. No.
Okay.
If I only intend on the story taking place in a small area, I might not go into that much detail. Like if I only need a continent, that's all I really need, then that's all I'll do. If I think and that another part of the world might be important, then I might do that, but not always. It's not always the whole world.
Okay. So that's kind of funny because I was gonna kind of go into that question where it's like, even if their characters are going to be in that map, is there a sense of making the whole map? And I guess I can go with Dave on this one, since you do make the whole map, right? If your players are only going to play a portion of the map, what's the point of making the rest of the other map? Is it something you just want to do because you don't like it to be a void, or is there something else to it?
Um, I suppose for me, a lot of it is just creative output, the desire to just kind of fill in that void with something. Whether or not it's ever addressed is, well, yet to be seen. And if it is, then I guess it's kind of nice to just like, hey, this is a reference to that thing, even if it's completely not in line with anything happening. But I suppose it's kind of cool to just kind of reference something that does exist rather than nothing that doesn't exist, I
Okay.
guess.
And I guess I'll go with Jarrett here. So, as you both your campaigns, they're made out of magic. It's a magical world. That is definitely a core assumption that can be made. How do you imagine magic works? Is it like taking out of like nature and casting it, or is there like some other like planar thing of science that we don't know that how it works? And I guess I'll start with Jarrett on this one.
Well, since you're playing the world right now, I don't want to spoil anything for you, so I won't go too deep
Okay,
into some of the
true.
yeah, won't go too deep into some of the bigger things, but for what I can tell you, um, it's for me, I decided, I like a cool idea that I had, which is based off of magic being the life force within a person, their soul, if you will. So, I decided to play with that, and I still kept it the base D&D rules for the most part to kind of make it work better. But yeah, like that's kind of what I went. I went with the magic system basically reflecting the life of a person, and being a part of a person's soul and who they are. And manipulating that. But I do have, as you said, scientific parts. I did have a little bit of background science and like things to work based on how they would work in real life. Like, you can't create energy out of nothing. You need to expend energy to make energy. So I kept that. There is a higher level of magic, but I won't go too deep into that for your sake. You'll have to find out. But it takes less of the scientific and more into the just spooky, pure, wackiness that can be magic, where you could do anything you want because magic isn't real. So, you could play around with it a bit.
Okay. And how about you, David? When you, like in your world, how does magic work in your setting?
Magical bullcrap in the air. Breathe it
Just-
in and ta-da, now magic works.
So it's just like it's just there. It's just like a what's the word?
It's a constant thing. It's just
Yeah,
kind of
it's like a constant thing.
existing.
It's not something that you don't just think about, like gravity, right? You just like it's there.
Yeah,
There's no
it's
point of
just
just
there.
thinking it. It's just
Yeah,
there.
if you know how to use it, cool. If you don't, well, sucks to be you, I guess.
All right. I guess another question, and it kind of going a little bit back onto the maps because I'm actually kind of curious because when I'm thinking of worlds, even when making a map, it's like okay, I can make it kind of like this map, but the problem is where is how do I make kind of like creation around it? And what I mean is like what's the first thing you do when making a map?
Hmm. Uh, First thing when making a map, well, obviously map out continents. Suppose just kind of scribble around until I get a shape that I am happy with.
And how do you get like a shape of it? Do you kind of like do like an AI generator and it just pops out and here's your continent, or do you do something else?
I find a big piece of paper. I take a pencil and I spend about 3 hours scribbling random lines until I can look at it and nod and be semi-satisfied with it.
Hey, I guess it's it works. It
There's
works.
probably a lot easier of ways, but well, I mean, might as well stick with good old fashioned, just going with whatever pops into your mind.
Okay. And what about you, Jared? When you first go into it, like how do you make your map?
Well, for me, before I even start my map, I think about the world. Key things, the story maybe a little bit, but that's not really too important. But just key things I want to have in the world, maybe a volcano or the city having for the current one is the capital city of the empire having a lake on both sides. So I kind of think about geographical things that I want in the world. And then when I build the map, I make sure that I put them where they would make sense. So a mountain range, I like to kind of have things work in a realistic setting. So put a mountain range, obviously there's a tectonic plate there. I'm not going to throw mountains around willy-nilly unless there's a cool reason for it. But how I do it is I think about that. I think about a couple things I want. Then I get into the drawing process, which, like David does, start with continents and then add the finer details later, like mountains, rivers, all that. But no, I don't use AI. I just come from my brain and what I know of how, geography works. I'm no expert, but I have a little knowledge. So I try to make it look realistic and just kind of make it as I go, but, include the things that I wanted there. So by the end of it, I have a map that I'm happy with. And along the way, I can change a few things to reflect new ideas or make it look better. So yeah, that's kind of how I do it. Just draw it, and, edit as I go, and just kind of until I feel good about it, until it's satisfying.
Okay. And when it comes to making cities and settlements, right? What is probably the most important aspect of it, would you say?
I would say a very important aspect of it is kind of like the atmosphere of a city. Okay, like you could do a map for a city if you want to do a drawn out one, but it's a lot of work. sometimes. And if you're only going to be visiting the city for a small bit, on your travels, making a map isn't necessarily the most important thing because there's no point in doing too much work for yourself. So I kind of think of the atmosphere of the city, maybe a couple landmarks in the city that the city might be famous for, like a lighthouse or an opera house, or a parliament building, or maybe even like a giant statue, dedicated to like a god or something. But basically, think about the atmosphere, couple landmarks, is it a happy city or is it like a downtrodden poor city? Kind of think about that, and then when explaining the city, focus on that to kind of give feeling and like life to the city. So you don't necessarily have to map it out if you have ideas and know what the city's going to be like, because a city is so big, there's so many people. If your players want to find a blacksmith shop, well, shoot an arrow into the air, you're going to find, like, there's a good chance you hit one. Like, there's so many services, especially in a larger city. So needing to map out, oh, this is where the blacksmith is, oh, this is where the tavern is, oh, this, well, there's going to be several, right? So you don't need to do that as long as you know the atmosphere and how you want the players to feel when they enter that city.
All right. And David, are you kind of the same too, like the atmosphere, or is there like another important aspect that you believe should be in cities and settlements?
I agree with atmosphere, but I'd say also a very good thing in a city is its like culture overall. Obviously, different places will have different societal norms and things like that. And when it comes to cities, a lot of them can be divvied up in between this and this cultural group and that one and this one. So yeah, suppose it is just the whole, I guess, feel of the city. Make different places that are in the city feel unique, even though it's still, well, the same city, and just make it fun, I suppose.
All right. And I guess talking about a little bit of culture, a bit of, and thinking about it, sometimes when I look at a world or creating a world, I look at it as, what type of government would I want this kind of city or settlement or even country kind of be run as? And my question is, what is your favorite like government to be incorporated like in like your world, or even run as like in one of your like your favorite cities? And I guess I'll start with David on this one.
Favorite government, plutocracy.
Ooh.
I believe I'm pronouncing that right. A bunch of big, scummy, rich people. Well, maybe not scummy, but a bunch of rich people run everything. It makes for fun little clashes because unless your characters or whoever you're playing in this world is very well off, you'll probably look at it and be like, yeah, there's that rich guy. I don't like that rich guy who runs everything.
All right.
And,
And for sorry for cutting off. I would say just for
okay.
our like viewers who are like watching who don't understand what a plutocracy is, do you want to give them a little what it is?
I can Google the exact definition on oxfordlanguages.com.
Well, if you want to be the most accurate on it, I was
Oh,
going to
shoot.
say a little summary of it, but
An elite or ruling class of people whose power derives from their wealth. I think that is about as basic as it can possibly get.
So basically, nobles. It's just a city of a bunch of nobles that just kind of rule the
Rich
world.
people. It's like if the Monopoly man ran a country.
Yeah. And I don't know if there was anything else you want to add because I accidentally cut you off there. Sorry.
No. That's all good. I forget. I can't remember what I ate for breakfast this morning.
All right. And how about you, Jarrett? What's your favorite?
I've always liked to have different, like, if I'm gonna have like a couple different countries, I like to kind of change it up and have each country have a slightly different ruling system. Maybe one's, a senate, and another's, a kingdom. But one that I've always really tend to gravitate towards for an overarching thing is I really enjoy a theocracy, which is basically like a religious ruling body. I've always liked that in the world because you can kind of do two things at once with that, which is you have the government and how they work, which the players might interact with or learn about as the story goes. But you could also iron in some of the faiths of the world, whether it's a monotheistic or a polytheistic pantheon or whatnot. But you can kind of mix in a little bit of both, and it's always really fun, I find, to have that in a world, because in D&D specifically, there are just so many gods and so much lore that's already out there that you can use to influence certain things that you build, and just a theocracy is a really fun way to do that, I find.
All right. And I know we're coming up close on time wise, so I'll ask about maybe 3 more questions. My next question is what is your favorite part on the process of making your world? Is it actually making the map? I know for you, or I assume for you, Jared, it's the story part. You said, right?
Yes, I really like to think about what story I want to tell and what story I want the players to interact with, because the story can change based on choices they do. But my favorite part is thinking about all these moving pieces that I can bring together for a story for all of us to enjoy, which goes hand in hand with building the world. Like, a good story works really well because you can reflect certain things that you've made in the world. So yeah, hands down, building a good story and just sitting there and thinking about what can I have them do next, or what challenges can I bring to the players now? And, are the stakes going to be super high because it's something that they're invested in, or am I, going to slow it down for a nice little calm, relaxing bit, but still relevant to the story? Like, just building a story on top of the world is just, to me, it's the most fun thing about D&D.
All right. And then what about you, dude? What's your favorite part of the process of making your world?
Process of making my world. Those creating ways that I know the people who are going to be running around in said world to enjoy themselves, have fun, that kind of thing. Make specific things that I know they'll interact with, or find funny ways to include jokes or stupid other things like that.
Okay. And I guess yeah, we're gonna leave it to this last question just because time is a little pinching a little bit. If you could give one tip to a person who's building their world, what would that tip be? And I'll start with David on this one.
What would that tip be? Would do what feels comfortable. Don't think you have to look at, say, big fantasy things like Lord of the Rings and write 7 books to base your little tiny world you're making. You can write 3 paragraphs and say that the town's name is Fort Water Bottle or something, and that is more than enough. As long as you do what feels fun and good to you, you do not have to write a book or several books to describe your world. I mean, unless you want to, but if you're just starting, I would just recommend do something comfortable. Don't try and go like crazy with it.
All right, and what about you, Jared?
I would say a tip that I would have is,
Hey guys, a little bit of technical difficulties, but we're going to transition to the last tip for Jared again. And yeah, we'll do the last question again. So yeah, just to repeat the question. So Jared, if you could give a tip to a person who is building the world, what tip would that be?
Like David said, you don't really need to have everything thought out. I agree with that a lot. But the tip that I would say is that there's a table for everyone, players and DM. So when telling your story, you have to understand that and cater what you're doing to your group. If you're going to tell a story, you want to tell a story that everyone has fun and is comfortable with. So you need to be aware of their boundaries, their limits, what they're okay with and what they're not okay with. But just because of that, you don't necessarily need to limit yourself either, because if conflict of interest, there's other places that they can go, just as there's other places you can go. But if you want a good, successful table talk, discover what works for you as a group. And if you can do that, you will have not only a successful, fun time playing the game, but a very well and nourished world, because the two go hand in hand. If you don't have a good world and you don't really have a direction that you want for that world, it's going to be confusing. You're not going to have a fun time. So build the world, make sure you know what everyone's comfortable with and what you're comfortable with, and just you're there to have fun. So have fun with that. And that's going to go a long way to making sure that you are able to have that fun.
All right. That's kind of like very well said. So again, for me, a person that is thinking of maybe starting to do world building, definitely these tips might help me, because I imagine there's been times where I'm like, when I first did try to start, I tried to do this whole big thing, like, okay, this would be the continent here, this continent, all right, this is the government system and all of that. And I got burnt out real quick.
Yeah.
So, I'll definitely, those tips are definitely good tips. And definitely when I get back to it, I'll definitely take those tips to heart. But thank you, Jarrett and David, for coming out. Thank you for
No problem.
Giving us your world building knowledge and helping others who are interested in story building and making worlds, helping them have a little bit inspiration, especially for those who are first starting out for it. Definitely, I would give you for those who are viewing and you are thinking of going into world building and such, I definitely do some research. I know there's a YouTube video that Matt Mercer did about world building. Definitely check on that one. And also, if you have the Dungeon Master Guide on when it comes to making world building too, that one also will help you there too, on just kind of starting the world. And it will ask you the questions, and from there you just have to answer it on making your world. But thank you again, Jared, Dave, for coming out, and thank you viewers for watching. And you all have a great night.
When do I get paid?
I'll pay you on Friday. I'll get the Baja Blast. I'll get the Mandu Baja Blast. I'll make sure.
Good.
Thank you.
All right.